In the royal court of Aldemar, there existed a law more sacred than any written in ancient books. Slaves were forbidden from speaking in the presence of nobility. For 3 years, Zara had served in perfect silence, her voice never once heard by those who ruled her fate. But when a terrible injustice threatened to destroy an innocent family, and when the most powerful people in the kingdom chose willful blindness over truth, one woman's forbidden voice would shatter centuries of tradition and change the course of history forever. If you love stories of impossible courage, voices that refuse to be silenced, and plot twists that rewrite everything, make sure to subscribe and hit that notification bell, because we bring you the most incredible medieval tales every day. This is a story about the moment when silence becomes complicity, when one person's courage to speak truth becomes more powerful than armies, and when a slave's forbidden voice reveals secrets that could topple a kingdom. Stay until the end, because what Zara reveals when she finally breaks her silence will leave you speechless, and questioning everything you thought you knew about power, justice, and the price of truth. The morning light filtered through the towering stained glass windows of Aldemar's great hall, casting ribbons of colored light across the polished marble floor where Zara knelt in perfect stillness. At 22, she had learned to make herself invisible in the presence of royalty, a skill essential for survival in a court where slaves who drew unwanted attention often simply disappeared. Her dark skin bore the subtle scars of 3 years of servitude, and her simple brown dress marked her as property rather than person in the eyes of the nobility who filled the magnificent chamber. What set Zara apart from other slaves, however, was the gift that she dared only use in secret, a voice of such haunting beauty that even the castle's stones seemed to listen when she sang. Late at night, while cleaning the empty halls, she would hum melodies that her convent education had taught her, lullabies and hymns that echoed through the corridors like whispered prayers. The few servants who had heard her sing spoke of it in hushed tones, calling her voice touched by angels, despite her lowly station. The court of King Aldric was in session, a weekly spectacle where the realm's most powerful gathered to witness the dispensation of royal justice. Zara's position near the back wall allowed her to observe the proceedings while remaining unnoticed, her role limited to serving wine and clearing dishes when commanded. The ancient law was absolute and unyielding. No slave could speak or sing in the presence of nobility without express permission, and such permission was never granted. To break this sacred silence meant death, a fate that had befallen more than one servant who forgot their place. Yet those few nobles who had heard fragments of Zara's voice while she worked found themselves inexplicably drawn to its musical quality, though none would dare acknowledge a slave's artistic gifts. Today's session carried unusual tension, as Lord Commander Marcus Blackthorne stood before the throne to present charges against the Baker family, common folk accused of treason for allegedly selling grain to enemies of the crown during the recent border conflicts. Thomas Baker, a man of perhaps 40 years, stood with his wife Elena and their teenage son Peter, their faces showing the bewilderment of simple people caught in forces beyond their understanding. "Your Majesty," Lord Commander Blackthorne declared, his voice carrying across the hall with practiced authority, "these criminals sold grain reserves to enemy forces, weakening our own supply lines and endangering the lives of our brave soldiers. The evidence is clear and overwhelming. They must face the ultimate penalty to serve as an example to any others who might consider such treachery." King Aldric, a man whose once noble features had been hardened by years of paranoid rule, leaned forward on his throne with obvious interest. "Present your evidence, Lord Commander. Let all hear the proof of their betrayal." His voice carried the weight of absolute power, and every person in the hall understood that the Baker family's fate had likely been decided before the trial even began. Zara watched from her position against the wall as Lord Blackthorne produced documents that purported to show sales transactions between the Baker family and enemy agents. The papers looked official, bearing seals and signatures that would convince any casual observer of their authenticity. But Zara's heart raced as she recognized the terrible lie being perpetrated before the entire court. 3 weeks earlier, while serving in Lord Blackthorne's private chambers, Zara had inadvertently witnessed a conversation that now took on devastating significance. She had been cleaning the fireplace, invisible as always, when Lord Blackthorne met with his secretary to discuss the fabrication of evidence against various families who had refused to pay increased taxes. The Baker family was specifically mentioned as needing to be made an example of, to encourage others to comply with the Crown's financial demands. "The transactions speak for themselves," Lord Blackthorne continued, holding up the forged documents with theatrical flourish. Gold changed hands, grain moved to enemy territory, and our own people suffered as a result. There can be no mercy for such betrayal of the realm. His performance was masterful, calculated to convince the watching nobles that justice was being served rather than perverted. Thomas Baker stepped forward, his weathered hands clasped before him in desperate supplication. "Your Majesty, I swear by all that is holy, we never sold grain to any enemies. We barely had enough to feed our own family after paying the increased taxes. Please, investigate further, speak to our neighbors, examine our stores. You will find no evidence of treachery because no treachery occurred." His plea was honest and heartfelt, carrying the ring of truth that only genuine innocence could provide. But King Aldric's expression showed no softening, no willingness to consider alternatives to the narrative being presented by his trusted Lord Commander. "The evidence has been presented and verified," the king replied coldly. "Your denials mean nothing against documented proof of your crimes. Do you take us for fools who cannot read plain contracts bearing your own signature?" His words carried finality that chilled everyone present, marking the end of any hope the Baker family might have harbored for mercy or justice. Zara felt her hands trembling as she gripped the wine pitcher she had been instructed to keep ready for the noble's refreshment. Every fiber of her being screamed with the need to speak, to reveal the truth she had witnessed, to save this innocent family from destruction based on lies. But the law was absolute, her voice was forbidden, her testimony worthless, her very existence contingent upon maintaining the silence that kept her alive. As Lord Blackthorne prepared to call for the family's execution, Zara made a choice that would either save innocent lives or cost her own. The weight of truth pressed against her chest like a physical force, demanding release regardless of the consequences. Some things, she realized, were more important than survival. The moment stretched like eternity as King Aldric raised his hand to deliver the sentence that would seal the Baker family's fate. The great hall fell into absolute silence, hundreds of nobles and courtiers waiting to witness royal justice in its most final form. Elena Baker clutched her son Peter close to her side, while Thomas stood with quiet dignity despite the terror that must have been coursing through his veins. They were simple people facing complex political forces they could never hope to understand or overcome. "For the crime of treason against the crown," King Aldric began, his voice carrying the weight of absolute authority, "I sentence Thomas Baker, his wife Elena, and their son Peter to death by hanging, to be carried out at dawn tomorrow. Let their fate serve as warning to any who would." "No!" The word erupted from Zara's lips like lightning splitting the sky, but it carried with it the full power of her extraordinary voice, a sound so rich and commanding that it seemed to fill every corner of the great hall with crystalline clarity. The musical quality that had marked her secret singing now transformed her spoken word into something that resonated in the chest of every person present, echoing off the stone walls with such force that every head turned toward the source of this unprecedented interruption. The sound of a slave's voice speaking without permission in the royal court was shocking enough, but the sheer beauty and power of that voice made the moment even more electrifying. King Aldric's face transformed from regal authority to murderous rage in an instant, but underneath his fury was something else, a flicker of recognition at the extraordinary quality of the voice that had dared interrupt his court. "Who dares?" he roared, rising from his throne like an avenging angel. "Who dares violate the sacred silence of our court with such? He paused, struggling to reconcile his anger with the undeniable beauty of what he had heard. "Seize her!" Lord Commander Blackthorne commanded, his own face showing alarm as he realized that his carefully orchestrated trial was being threatened by the one person he had never considered a potential obstacle. "Seize that slave immediately. She has violated the most sacred law of our realm." Guards moved toward Zara with the efficiency of men accustomed to swift action, but she raised her voice again before they could reach her, and again, the musical quality that had made her secret songs legendary among the servants now lent power and authority to her words of accusation. "Your Majesty, I have witnessed evidence that proves these people are innocent. Lord Commander Blackthorne has fabricated the documents you have seen. I heard him planning this deception with my own ears." Her voice carried clearly to every corner of the hall, its natural beauty making even her desperate accusations sound like a form of sacred song. The accusation hit the court like a physical blow, sending waves of shock and disbelief through the assembled nobles. Never in the history of Aldemar had a slave dared to accuse a noble of lying, much less in open court before the king himself, and never had such an accusation been delivered with a voice so compellingly beautiful that it seemed to carry its own authority. Several nobles found themselves believing her before they had even processed the content of her words, simply because the musical quality of her voice suggested truth and sincerity. "This is intolerable!" Lord Blackthorn shouted, his face flushing red with rage and something that might have been fear. "Your Majesty, this slave seeks to disrupt justice with wild lies. She should be executed immediately for her presumption." His protest was vehement, but careful observers might have noticed the desperation beneath his anger. King Aldrich stood motionless for a moment, his face cycling through emotions too complex to easily interpret. The rigid law said the slave should die for speaking without permission. But the specific nature of her accusation, combined with her obvious willingness to face death to make it, gave him pause. "What evidence do you claim to possess, slave?" he asked, his voice deadly quiet. Zara felt the weight of every eye in the hall upon her as she stepped forward, knowing that each word might be her last. 3 weeks ago, I was cleaning the fireplace in Lord Commander Blackthorn's private chambers when he met with his secretary. I heard them discuss creating false evidence against families who refused to pay increased taxes. The Baker family was specifically mentioned as needing to be made an example of, to encourage others to comply. "Lies!" Blackthorn roared, but his protest lacked conviction. The desperate fabrications of a slave seeking to save her own worthless life. "Your Majesty, giving any credence to such accusations would undermine the very order upon which our kingdom is built." But King Aldrich was studying Zara's face with the shrewd intelligence that had kept him on the throne through decades of political turbulence, and more than that, he was listening to her voice with the ear of someone who understood the power of music and rhetoric. "You understand the penalty for false accusation against a noble?" he asked her directly. "You understand that if you cannot prove these claims, you will face tortures that make simple execution seem merciful?" "I understand, Your Majesty," Zara replied, and even speaking these simple words, her voice carried such natural music that several courtiers found themselves leaning forward to hear better. "But I also understand that innocent people will die if I remain silent. Some truths are worth dying for." The way she spoke the words, with the same musical cadence that marked her secret songs, gave them a weight and beauty that seemed to transform the great hall into a cathedral where truth was being spoken as sacred hymn. Queen Isabella, who had remained silent throughout the proceedings, suddenly spoke for the first time. "Husband, perhaps we should hear what evidence this woman claims to possess before deciding her fate. If she is lying, the truth will expose her. If she is telling truth—" She left the sentence unfinished, but the implication was clear to everyone present. The Queen's intervention changed the dynamic entirely. What had been a simple matter of punishing a slave for breaking ancient law now became a complex question of justice that required careful consideration. King Aldrich looked between his wife, his Lord Commander, the accused family, and the slave who had shattered 3 years of silence to speak truth to power. "Very well," he said finally, his voice carrying grim determination. "Let us examine this slave's claims thoroughly. If she speaks truth, then justice demands we hear it. If she lies, then justice demands she pay the ultimate price for her deception." The great hall buzzed with whispered conversations as nobles struggled to comprehend the unprecedented situation unfolding before them. Never in their collective memory had a slave's testimony been considered in matters of royal justice, and the very notion seemed to challenge every assumption about social order and divine hierarchy that underpinned their world. King Aldrich's decision to investigate Zara's claims rather than execute her immediately marked a departure from tradition so radical that its implications were difficult to grasp. "Bring Master Geoffrey," the king commanded, referring to his chief record keeper and one of the few men in the kingdom whose integrity was beyond question. "If these accusations have merit, there will be traces in official documents, inconsistencies that can be verified or disproven." His pragmatic approach showed the calculating mind that had kept him in power through numerous political crises. Lord Commander Blackthorn's confidence began to show cracks as the investigation took shape around him. "Your Majesty, surely the word of a mere slave cannot be given equal weight to documented evidence and the testimony of your most loyal servants. This sets a dangerous precedent that could undermine all future governance." His protest carried desperation poorly disguised as righteous indignation. "The precedent that concerns me," King Aldrich replied coldly, "is the possibility that innocent people might be executed based on fabricated evidence. If such corruption exists within my court, it must be rooted out regardless of the social status of those who expose it." His words sent a chill through the assembled nobles, many of whom had their own secrets that they preferred remained buried. Master Geoffrey arrived within minutes, carrying ledgers and documents that chronicled the kingdom's financial transactions with meticulous precision. As the elderly scribe spread his records across a table near the throne, Zara found herself at the center of attention in a way that violated every instinct for survival she had developed during her years of slavery. "Tell us specifically what you overheard," Queen Isabella said gently, her voice carrying an authority that was both regal and maternal. "Every detail you can remember, no matter how small it might seem." The Queen's intervention seemed to offer protection that emboldened Zara to speak more freely. Lord Commander Blackthorn told his secretary that several families had refused to pay the increased grain taxes, Zara began, her voice growing stronger as she recounted the conversation. "He said they needed to be taught a lesson that would encourage others to comply. He specifically mentioned the Baker family as being too comfortable in their defiance, and needing to be removed as an example to others." "Preposterous," Blackthorn interjected, but his voice lacked its earlier conviction. Even if such a conversation occurred, it could refer to legitimate concerns about tax collection rather than any conspiracy to fabricate evidence. His explanation was plausible enough to give him some protection, but careful observers noticed the sweat beginning to form on his brow. Master Geoffrey looked up from his examination of the financial records, his aged face troubled. "Your Majesty, there are indeed irregularities in the documentation regarding the Baker family's alleged transactions. The paper appears to be of different quality than other documents from the same period, and the ink composition seems inconsistent with standard administrative materials." The revelation sent another wave of shock through the court, as the possibility that Zara's accusations might have merit became increasingly difficult to dismiss. Thomas Baker, who had been listening to the proceedings with growing hope and amazement, stepped forward with renewed confidence. "Your Majesty," he said, his voice carrying the strength of someone who sensed vindication approaching, "I can provide the names of every person who purchased grain from our farm during the time period in question. Our neighbors, our regular customers, the local miller, all can testify that we sold to no strangers, no suspicious figures, no one who could have been enemy agents." Queen Isabella turned to address the assembled court directly, her voice carrying the authority of centuries of royal tradition. "Let messengers be sent immediately to question these witnesses. Let the grain stores be examined, the local records investigated, every claim verified or disproven. If corruption has infected our justice system, it will be exposed completely." Lord Commander Blackthorn realized that his carefully constructed deception was unraveling beyond any hope of repair. The combination of Zara's testimony, Master Geoffrey's document analysis, and the promise of witness verification created an overwhelming case against his fabricated evidence. But he was not a man to accept defeat gracefully. "This is madness," he declared, his composure finally cracking completely. "You would overturn centuries of law and order based on the lies of a slave? You would allow the lowest members of society to question their betters, to cast doubt on the very people who maintain civilization itself." His appeal to traditional authority was his last desperate attempt to salvage the situation. But King Aldrich's face showed no sympathy for his Lord Commander's position. "What maintains civilization," he replied with deadly quiet, "is justice applied fairly to all, not the protection of corrupt officials who pervert law for personal gain. If these accusations prove true, then you have not only betrayed innocent people but betrayed the crown itself by making us party to your deceptions." The investigation that followed over the next several hours was thorough and devastating. Witnesses arrived to testify about the Baker family's honest dealings. Master Geoffrey's analysis confirmed the document's fraudulent nature, and most damning of all, a search of Lord Commander Blackthorn's quarters revealed correspondence with other nobles discussing the systematic use of false accusations to control political opposition and extract wealth from resistant families. As the evidence mounted, Zara found herself transformed from forbidden slave to key witness in one of the greatest scandals in the kingdom's history. The voice that had been silenced by law and tradition, the same voice that had sung secret songs of hope in empty corridors, became the instrument of justice itself, proving that truth spoken with courage and carried by beauty could indeed change everything. As the afternoon sun cast longer shadows across the great hall, the full scope of Lord Commander Blackthorn's corruption became increasingly clear with each piece of evidence uncovered. The investigation had revealed not just the fabrication of charges against the Baker family, but an entire network of false accusations used to eliminate political opponents and enrich corrupt officials. Zara's decision to break her forbidden silence had opened floodgates that would reshape the kingdom's understanding of justice and accountability. "The evidence is overwhelming," Master Geoffrey announced as he completed his analysis of the documents seized from Blackthorn's quarters. "At least 17 families have been falsely accused over the past 2 years, their properties confiscated and redistributed among Lord Commander Blackthorn's allies. The systematic nature of these crimes suggests conspiracy involving multiple members of the court." King Aldric's face had grown progressively darker as each revelation emerged, his anger transforming from mere displeasure to the kind of royal wrath that had historically reshaped entire kingdoms. 17 families, he repeated, his voice carrying the weight of accumulated fury. 17 families destroyed, their members executed or imprisoned, their children left orphaned, all to feed the greed and ambition of men I trusted with the administration of justice. Lord Commander Blackthorn, now stripped of his ceremonial sword and standing under heavy guard, made one final attempt to salvage his position. "Your Majesty, these are complex matters of state security that require difficult decisions. Sometimes harsh measures are necessary to maintain order and protect the realm from subtle enemies who work through seemingly innocent citizens." His words carried the hollow ring of desperate rationalization. "Harsh measures against guilty parties are one thing," Queen Isabella replied with cutting precision. "Fabricating guilt to justify predetermined punishments is something else entirely. You have perverted justice into a tool of personal enrichment while wearing the sacred trust of royal authority." Her condemnation carried special weight, as queens traditionally remained above the daily administration of justice. Thomas Baker, still processing the miraculous reversal of his family's fortunes, approached the throne with obvious emotion. "Your Majesty, how can we ever express our gratitude for this justice? We faced death based on lies, and only the courage of this brave woman saved our lives." He gestured toward Zara, acknowledging her role in their salvation with obvious reverence. The attention focused on Zara made her acutely aware of how her situation had fundamentally changed. No longer could she retreat into the invisibility that had protected her for 3 years. Her voice, once forbidden, had become the instrument of truth that exposed corruption at the highest levels of government. But with that transformation came both opportunity and danger that she was only beginning to understand. "The question before us now," King Aldric said, his voice carrying the authority of someone accustomed to making decisions that affected thousands of lives, "is how to ensure that such corruption cannot take root again in our system of justice. This slave—" He paused, seeming to reconsider his words. "This woman has demonstrated that truth can come from any source, and that moral courage is not limited by social station or legal status." Prince Edmund, the king's eldest son and heir to the throne, spoke for the first time during the proceedings. "Father, perhaps this tragedy can become an opportunity to reform our laws regarding testimony and legal procedures. If corruption can be hidden behind restrictions on who may speak truth, then perhaps those restrictions serve injustice more than justice." His suggestion carried the weight of future policy, as his eventual reign would be shaped by the lessons learned from this crisis. The revolutionary implications of the prince's words were not lost on anyone present. The idea that slaves and common people might be permitted to testify in matters of justice represented a fundamental shift in the social order that had governed the kingdom for centuries. Yet the alternative, maintaining systems that could be so easily corrupted, seemed equally dangerous to the stability of royal rule. "There is wisdom in that observation," Queen Isabella agreed, her support lending additional authority to the prince's suggestion. "Laws that protect corruption are not truly laws at all, but merely tools of oppression disguised as justice. If we are to rule justly, we must be willing to hear truth regardless of its source." Zara listened to this discussion with growing amazement, realizing that her single moment of courage had triggered consequences far beyond her ability to predict or control. The forbidden voice that she had raised to save one family was now being discussed as the catalyst for reforms that could affect every person in the kingdom. "Lord Commander Blackthorne," King Aldrich said, turning his attention back to the disgraced official, "you are hereby stripped of all titles, lands, and authority. You will be held pending trial for treason, corruption, and the murders of innocent citizens. Your co-conspirators will be identified and face similar justice." The sentence was delivered with finality that allowed no appeal or mitigation. "And the families who were wrongly accused?" Prince Edmund asked, his concern showing the character that would make him a just ruler. "What restitution can be made for the injustices they suffered?" "Their names will be cleared, their properties restored where possible, and compensation provided for their suffering," the king declared. "More than that, they will be honored as victims of corruption who deserve the kingdom's gratitude for their unwitting sacrifice." His promise of restitution marked another departure from traditional royal practice, which rarely acknowledged error or provided compensation for official mistakes. As the formal proceedings drew toward conclusion, King Aldrich turned his full attention to Zara for the first time since her initial interruption. "You understand that your actions today have violated laws that have governed this realm for centuries," he said, his voice carrying both sternness and something approaching respect. "Yet those same actions have prevented grave injustice and exposed corruption that threatened the very foundations of royal authority." The great hall had grown quiet as every person present understood they were witnessing a moment that would be remembered and discussed for generations. King Aldrich stood before his throne, the weight of centuries of tradition balanced against the clear evidence that sometimes that tradition could serve injustice rather than prevent it. Zara remained where she had stood throughout the investigation, no longer the invisible slave she had been hours earlier, but not yet something new whose place in the social order had been clearly defined. "The law is clear about the penalty for slaves who speak without permission in royal court," King Aldrich continued, his words causing a collective intake of breath throughout the hall. "That law exists to maintain order and prevent disruption of official proceedings. Yet today we have seen that blind adherence to such restrictions can allow corruption to flourish unchallenged." His internal struggle was visible on his face as he wrestled with competing principles of justice and tradition. Queen Isabella stepped forward, her movement drawing every eye in the great hall. "My lord husband," she said with the formal address used in public proceedings, "might I suggest that laws which prevent the exposure of truth serve neither order nor justice? This woman's courage has saved innocent lives and exposed corruption that threatened the integrity of your reign." Her words carried both personal conviction and political wisdom. Prince Edmund nodded in agreement with his mother's assessment. "Father, the choice before us is clear. We can punish this woman for violating a law that protected corruption, or we can honor her for demonstrating that true loyalty to the crown means speaking truth, even when that truth is dangerous." His support for clemency reflected the values that would guide his eventual rule. Lord Chancellor Aldwin, one of the few high officials whose integrity had never been questioned, stepped forward to address the king. "Your Majesty, if I may observe, the law regarding slave testimony was created in different times for different purposes. Perhaps those purposes are no longer served by maintaining restrictions that can shield wrongdoing from exposure." His legal perspective carried special weight in matters of judicial interpretation. Zara found herself at the center of a debate that went far beyond her personal fate to encompass fundamental questions about justice, tradition, and social order. The voice she had raised to save the Baker family had become a catalyst for examining every assumption about how truth should be revealed and protected in royal governance. "Speak," King Aldrich commanded, addressing Zara directly. "You have already broken the law regarding slave testimony. Now I give you permission to speak freely about your understanding of what has transpired here today." His invitation was both a test and an opportunity, allowing her to demonstrate whether her earlier courage extended to thoughtful analysis of complex issues. Zara took a deep breath, understanding that this moment would define not just her own future but potentially the future of many others who found themselves without voice in the current system. "Your Majesty," she began, her words careful but confident, "I spoke today not to defy your authority, but to serve it by ensuring that your justice was based on truth rather than lies. A kingdom built on false foundations cannot stand, regardless of how powerful its armies or how ancient its traditions." Her words carried a sophistication that surprised many of the nobles present, revealing an intelligence and education that seemed inconsistent with her status as a slave. Several courtiers exchanged glances, beginning to wonder about her background and how someone of such obvious capability had come to serve in bondage. "You speak with unusual wisdom for someone in your position," Queen Isabella observed, her tone carrying curiosity rather than suspicion. "And with a voice that carries remarkable beauty despite your circumstances. Tell us about your background, your education, your understanding of law and governance. These are not common subjects of study among those born to slavery, nor is such musical training typically available to servants." The question touched on secrets that Zara had kept hidden for 3 years, truths about her past that could either elevate or endanger her depending on how they were received. "Your Majesty," she replied carefully, her naturally musical voice making even her caution sound melodious, "I was not born to slavery. I was educated in a convent school before circumstances forced me into servitude. The sisters taught me not only to read and write, but to sing in the cathedral choir. They said my voice was a gift that should glorify truth and beauty." Her admission carried both pride and sadness, revealing the artistic training that had been suppressed by her enslavement. The revelation that she possessed formal education and musical training explained much about her behavior and speech patterns, but raised new questions about how someone with such background had become enslaved. In the Kingdom of Aldemar, both education and musical instruction were generally limited to nobility and clergy, making her literacy, articulate speech, and extraordinary voice markers of higher social status than her current position suggested. "What circumstances led to your enslavement?" King Aldrich asked, his investigative instincts aroused by the inconsistencies in her story. "If you received convent education, you must have been born to a family of some standing. How did you come to serve in our court as property rather than guest?" Zara hesitated, knowing that revealing her true background might complicate the delicate political situation even further. "My family supported the wrong side in a political dispute that occurred before your current reign, Your Majesty. When their faction lost power, I was sold into slavery to pay debts and ensure I could never claim inheritance or seek revenge for their downfall." The explanation provided context that made her current situation more understandable, while also revealing another layer of potential injustice that went beyond the immediate corruption they had just exposed. Political purges that reduced noble children to slavery represented a form of collective punishment that raised questions about the fairness of such policies. "Then you are not merely a slave who happened to witness corruption," Prince Edmund observed, "but a displaced noble whose own experience with injustice made you sensitive to its perpetration against others." His interpretation cast her actions in an even more heroic light, suggesting that her intervention came from personal understanding of how political power could be abused. "Perhaps," King Aldrich said slowly, "it is time to examine not just the corruption we have discovered today, but the broader question of how justice is administered throughout our realm. If educated nobles can be reduced to slavery for their families' political choices, if commoners can be executed on fabricated evidence, if the voices of the innocent can be silenced by law itself, then we must ask whether our system serves justice or merely serves power." The implications of King Aldrich's words rippled through the great hall like stones thrown into still water, creating waves of excitement, concern, and speculation among the assembled nobles. The suggestion that the kingdom's entire system of justice might require fundamental reform represented a challenge to established power structures that would affect every person present. Some saw opportunity in such changes, while others recognized threats to privileges they had long taken for granted. Your Majesty, Lord Chancellor Aldwin said carefully, such reforms would require extensive deliberation and careful implementation. The social order that has maintained stability for centuries cannot be altered hastily without risking chaos and unrest. His words carried the caution of someone who understood the complexities of governance but also recognized the need for change. Stability built on injustice is not true stability, Queen Isabella replied with conviction that surprised many who had assumed her role was purely ceremonial. It is merely oppression disguised as order. If our system allows corruption to flourish while silencing those who would expose it, then that system serves neither the crown nor the people we are sworn to protect. Prince Edmund stepped forward to stand beside Zara, a gesture that symbolically aligned the future of the monarchy with the principles she had demonstrated. This woman risked her life to serve justice when justice was being perverted by those in authority. If we punish her for that courage, we send a message that corruption will be protected over truth, that power matters more than righteousness. The prince's public support transformed Zara's status in ways that extended far beyond legal technicalities. No longer could she be dismissed as merely a disobedient slave who had violated ancient law. She was now a symbol of moral courage endorsed by the heir to the throne, making her both powerful and dangerous to those who preferred the old ways. I propose, King Aldric announced, his voice carrying the authority of final decision, that this woman be immediately freed from slavery and granted status appropriate to her birth and education. Furthermore, I propose the establishment of a new position within our court, that of Voice of Truth, whose responsibility will be to ensure that all voices can be heard when matters of justice are at stake. The revolutionary nature of this proposal stunned the assembled court into silence. Creating an official position specifically to enable testimony from those traditionally excluded from legal proceedings represented a fundamental shift in how power would be distributed and exercised within the kingdom. The implications extended far beyond Zara's individual situation to encompass every future case where truth might be hidden behind social barriers. And I propose, Queen Isabella added, building upon her husband's announcement, that the first person to hold this position be the woman whose courage exposed the corruption we have witnessed today. Let her voice, which was forbidden but spoke truth nonetheless, become the foundation for ensuring that no voice speaking truth will ever be forbidden again. The nomination of Zara for this unprecedented position created another wave of shock and speculation throughout the hall. Elevating a former slave to a position of such importance would challenge every assumption about social hierarchy and political authority that the nobility had accepted as natural and unchangeable. Thomas Baker, overwhelmed by the dramatic reversal of his family's fortunes, stepped forward once more to address the throne. Your Majesty, my family owes our lives to this woman's courage. If you will permit me to say so, the wisdom you show in honoring that courage rather than punishing it demonstrates why your reign will be remembered as a time when justice triumphed over corruption. His words carried the weight of someone who had faced death unjustly and been saved by the very reforms now being implemented. The Baker family's experience would become a powerful symbol of why such changes were necessary and how they could protect innocent people from future abuse of power. The position will require confirmation by the Royal Council, King Aldric acknowledged, showing awareness of the political complexities involved in such dramatic changes. But I believe the events of today have demonstrated beyond doubt that our kingdom needs institutional changes to prevent future corruption. The old ways clearly failed to protect either justice or the crown's integrity. Lord Commander Blackthorne, still under guard and facing trial for his crimes, made one final attempt to undermine the proceedings. Your Majesty, you make these decisions under the influence of shock and emotion. When you have time to consider the full implications of overturning centuries of law and tradition based on one dramatic incident, I believe you will reconsider these hasty reforms. The only thing hasty here, King Aldric replied with cold finality, was your rush to execute innocent people based on fabricated evidence. The reforms we implement today are designed to ensure that such corruption cannot hide behind law and tradition in the future. If that threatens your ability to profit from injustice, then the reforms are working exactly as intended. Zara listened to this exchange with emotions too complex to easily categorize. Relief at her survival mixed with amazement at her elevation, while anxiety about future responsibilities combined with satisfaction at seeing justice served. The forbidden voice that had broken her 3 years of silence had become the catalyst for changes that would echo through generations. "Do you accept this responsibility?" King Aldrich asked, addressing Zara directly. "Will you serve as voice of truth for this realm, ensuring that all who seek justice can find it regardless of their station or the power of those they accuse? Will you use that remarkable voice, which we now understand was meant for far more than secret songs, to speak for those who cannot speak for themselves?" "I accept, Your Majesty," Zara replied without hesitation, and for the first time in 3 years, she allowed her full vocal power to ring out freely in the great hall. The sound was magnificent, trained, powerful, and hauntingly beautiful, proving beyond doubt that her voice had indeed been meant for far greater purposes than silent servitude. "I will serve justice as faithfully as I can, and I will ensure that no voice speaking truth will ever be silenced by fear or tradition." 6 months after the dramatic events in the Great Hall, the kingdom of Aldemar had transformed in ways that exceeded even King Aldrich's most optimistic expectations. The establishment of the voice of truth position had created ripple effects throughout the realm's justice system, encouraging honest testimony and exposing additional corruption that had festered in darkness for years. Zara's new role had evolved into something far more significant than anyone had initially envisioned. The Office of Truth, as it came to be known, had become a beacon of hope for common people who previously had no recourse against powerful oppressors. Zara's background as both educated noble and enslaved servant gave her unique credibility with all levels of society, allowing her to bridge gaps that had traditionally divided the kingdom's social classes. Her staff now included former slaves, displaced nobles, reformed criminals, and idealistic young aristocrats who believed in justice over privilege. "The transformation has been remarkable," Prince Edmund observed during one of his regular meetings with Zara in her new offices adjacent to the royal chambers. "Not only have we eliminated the corruption we discovered, but we've created a system that actively prevents its return. Your voice didn't just change one trial, it changed the very foundation of how justice operates in our realm." Zara, now dressed in the distinctive blue and silver robes that marked her office, smiled with satisfaction tempered by awareness of how much work remained. "The real change, Your Highness, comes from knowing that truth can be spoken without fear of death. When people believe their voices matter, they find courage they never knew they possessed." Her words carried the wisdom of someone who had lived on both sides of power and understood its proper use. The Baker family had become symbols of the new justice system, their story told throughout the kingdom as proof that reform could protect innocent people from abuse of power. Thomas Baker now served as a regional magistrate, his experience with false accusation making him particularly sensitive to the need for thorough investigation before rendering judgment. His son Peter had been accepted into the Royal Academy, his education funded by the crown as partial recompense for his family's suffering. "Lady Zara," Queen Isabella said, using the title that had been formally granted along with Zara's new position, "I've received reports from across the kingdom about the impact of your reforms. Local magistrates report increased confidence among witnesses, while corrupt officials find themselves increasingly isolated as their victims discover they have recourse." The Queen's support had been crucial in establishing the legitimacy of the new system. The changes extended beyond formal legal proceedings to encompass broader social transformations that touched every aspect of life in Aldemar. The knowledge that voices could not be silenced by law had emboldened artisans to report unfair treatment, encouraged servants to expose abuse, and enabled merchants to challenge corrupt tax collection. The kingdom was experiencing a renaissance of civic engagement that strengthened the bonds between ruler and ruled. "There have been challenges," Zara acknowledged, her honesty reflecting the principles that had brought her to prominence. "Some nobles resent the loss of their ability to silence critics, and there are those who view any limitation on traditional authority as dangerous precedent. But the benefits far outweigh the difficulties. We have a more just society because truth is valued over comfort." King Aldrich entered the chamber with the bearing of a man whose reign had been validated by its adaptation to necessary change. "The neighboring kingdoms watch our experiment with great interest," he reported, his voice carrying satisfaction mixed with continued determination. "Some fear that our reforms will inspire similar changes in their own realms, while others seek to learn from our example. Change often appears threatening to those who benefit from existing injustices," Prince Edmund observed with a political wisdom that would serve him well as future king. But history shows that kingdoms which adapt to serve justice ultimately prove stronger and more stable than those which cling to outdated systems that serve only power. Lord Chancellor Aldwin, whose integrity had made him a crucial ally in implementing the reforms, brought news that demonstrated their broader impact. Your Majesty, I have correspondence from 17 different kingdoms requesting information about our Voice of Truth system. The concept of institutionalizing protection for honest testimony appears to be inspiring reform movements across the known world. The revelation that Aldamar's transformation was influencing other realms added another dimension to what had begun as one woman's desperate attempt to save an innocent family. Zara's forbidden voice had not only changed her own kingdom but was becoming a catalyst for justice reform that could reshape the entire civilized world. Perhaps, Zara reflected, the most important lesson we've learned is that truth doesn't become less true because it comes from unexpected sources. When we silence voices based on social status rather than factual accuracy, we impoverish our understanding and enable corruption to flourish unchallenged. The former slave who had risked everything to speak truth had become one of the most influential people in the kingdom, her voice now protected by law and amplified by institutional authority. But more than personal elevation, her story represented proof that courage could indeed change everything, not just individual circumstances, but entire systems of governance and social organization. The same voice that had once sung secret lullabies in empty corridors now spoke publicly for justice in halls of power. As evening fell over the castle, Zara stood at the window of her office, looking out over a kingdom where voices could no longer be forbidden simply because they belonged to the powerless. Sometimes, in quiet moments, she would hum those old melodies from her convent days, but now they carried different meaning, songs of triumph rather than sorrow, hymns of justice rather than hope deferred. Tomorrow, she said to Prince Edmund, we'll review the cases that have come to us from the eastern provinces. There are reports of tax collectors threatening families with false accusations if they don't pay bribes beyond what the law requires. Her tone carried the determination of someone who had found her true calling. And those voices will be heard, the prince assured her, because you proved that some laws deserve to be broken when they protect injustice over truth. Your forbidden voice, that beautiful, powerful voice that was meant to sing truth and speak justice, became the foundation for a system where no voice speaking truth need ever be forbidden again. The slave who had been forbidden from speaking or singing at court had indeed changed everything, not through violence or conquest, but through the simple revolutionary act of refusing to let truth be silenced by tradition. Her voice, trained in sacred music but forced into secular silence, had found its true purpose in speaking for those who had no voice at all. Her story became legend, inspiring future generations to remember that sometimes the most important words are those that are hardest to speak, and that a voice raised in courage, whether in song or speech, can transform not just individual lives, but entire civilizations.